Well, hi there. I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering. Hey, it's funny. I think I've produced 34 videos now, and I'm not sure I've ever defined what leadership is. So let's do that in this video. So first, let me tell you a little story about maybe highlighting why this is important. Probably for about the first 10 years of Tandem, I think I was involved in interviewing just about every leader we hired. And I developed a habit where I would ask three questions. And this is for people who were interviewing for some kind of managerial leadership position. So the first thing I would do is I would say, hey, as you think about this position, I mean, what percentage of your time do you anticipate being a leader? And invariably, the answer was some version of 100%, 90%, most of the time, all the time, something like that. So, okay, so good. And then I would say, okay, so what is leadership? And I got to tell you, it was amazing how many times people would look at me and say something like, I've never really thought about it. Seriously? You've got this resume, you've been a leader for 15 years, and you never thought about what leadership is. And this was what I consistently heard. And, in hindsight, I wish I would have written that down so I'd actually have data rather than just these anecdotes. And then I would ask them the third question. I'd say, okay, so, regarding being a leader, what have you done to develop your own skill as a leader? And I would clarify what I'm looking for is, have you read any books? If so, what books? Have you read any articles? Have you taken classes? Have you gone to seminars? What have you done in the past to try to become a better leader? And this one too was pretty shocking. Is generally people would say something like, well, not really anything. Now, we had one person who was interviewing to be a director, and when I asked, what is leadership, the response I was given was telling other people what to do. That's got to be one of the worst answers I've heard. But then when I asked the third one, the response was, I don't go to seminars. I have people who work for me go to seminars. Now, shockingly, we hired the person nonetheless, and at any rate, we did what we did. At any rate, so the point is then let's try to get clear on what leadership is. Now, the wrinkle is there is nothing even vaguely approaching consensus among leadership researchers on what leadership is. One of the founders of one of the real early significant figures in the world of leadership studies observed that, there's as many definitions of leadership as there are people who have attempted to define it. So one of the popular writers, kind of the popular press, not so scientifically based, he's fond of saying leadership is influence. In fact, I think he's even got a whole conference that is just called Leadership is Influence, and I don't think anybody would really argue that influence isn't part of leadership, but I think you'll find very few researchers. I doubt you could find a single actual researcher who would say that's a sufficient answer. At any rate, so there's many definitions, and this is my video, so I get to use mine. So here's the definition I floated in my dissertation. So I said, leadership is a process of influence that involves relationships, communication, and vision. So first, when I say process of influence, what I'm trying to clarify is there's another video I did on trait approach versus process approach. And I'm trying to get to that where I want to say, some of the older writers, and particularly some of the writers from like the 1930s and 40s and 50s, I mean, they're pretty comical to read. They'll say things like, as a manager, you need to dominate your people, and they'll actually use that word dominate. What is this? And at any rate, their idea was that leadership was a trait. So you're this tall and your hair is this color and you are or are not a leader. And the logical fallacy of that approach, I think, is simply this. If you're saying leadership is just about the leader, it seems to follow then that leadership is not about the follower. I mean, you just told me it's just about the leader. Okay, so if that's true, and we see you're a leader, you can lead engineers, then it would, if it's only about you, then it would seem to follow that you could also lead preschoolers or cheerleaders or professional athletes. I mean, you see the logic, it's crazy. You know, clearly leadership is more than just about a leader. It's a process that involves the leader, the follower, and the context, and the interaction between the leader and the followers in that context. So that's why I'm saying it's a process of influence. Now, next, getting to influence, I do think influence is an essential part of leadership. I mean, if you aren't influencing people, I'm not really sure you're leading them. And, you know, in one of my other recent videos, I gave a little bit about why I don't like this idea of, some people float this idea of the platinum rule, which is treat others as they want to be treated, as opposed to the golden rule, which is treat others as you would yourself like to be treated. And the long and the short of it is, I think with the platinum rule, we abdicate our role of influence. You know, if you just say, well, I'll just do whatever they want, that's not called leadership. That's, I don't know, that's called, I don't know what it is, you know. But anyway, so leadership is a process of influence that involves relationships. So let's make no mistake about it. When you get into leadership, you are now in the people business. You are now in the relationship business. It is paramount now, where leadership is about relating to people, and the degree that which you're successful at relating and encouraging and building trust and you know, influencing and letting yourself be influenced by your followers, not in the abdication kind of way, but in the way of, you know, a healthy leadership relationship is a two-way street. You know, make no mistake about it, you are in the relationship business, and that means that as an engineer, you're in uncharted territory, possibly, but when you become a leader, you are now in the relationship business. Leadership involves relationship and communication. So now it's on you to communicate to your people. If there is a misunderstanding, if someone in the department didn't understand what we're trying to do, that is on you. Leadership is about communication. In fact, when you look at textbooks, there's generally two approaches that textbooks will take. They'll take this one or that one. And one of the approaches is called the communication approach. And the whole theory of leadership and the communication approach is they sort of start with, fundamentally, leadership involves communication, and then they kind of go from there. In fact, the definitive textbook on leadership, the definitive graduate level textbook, Peter Northhouse's Leadership Theory and Practice, you know, that's written by Northouse. That's why we call it Northhouse's. At any rate, Peter Northhouse's PhD was in communication. I mean, that's his expert, and he's now become this world authority on leadership because he comes at it in part from communication. Okay, so leadership is a process of influence that involves relationships, communication, and vision. So the idea here of vision is we've got to cast a vision, we've got to articulate, we've got to say, listen, this is where we're going to go. This is what the future will look like. This is what we want to communicate. And I recently was talking to one of the people who's now an engineering manager at Tandem, Dave, and he reminded me that about 10 years ago when he was an intern, I realized this guy's the real thing, and he and a couple of the others, they're going to be the bedrocks of the engineering organization. And indeed today, the 5 of them that were in that group are all the managers in the software team at Tandem. They are completely leading the team. And what Dave reminded me is I told them, guys, we're going to start reading books together, because there's going to be a day when each one of you will be leading your own department. You'll be having your own team. And Dave was telling me, goes, I just thought you were crazy. I thought there's no way that's going to happen. You know, he's this young intern, and I'm talking like you're going to be a manager. And fast forward 10 years, and guess what? He is a manager. He is a very good manager. And each person in that room turned out exactly like I said. See, what I did is I cast a vision. I said, guys, this is where we're going to go. You know, and as engineering managers, we cast a vision. We are going to have world-class software. We're going to have software that works. Every time it's going to be easy to use. It's going to be, whatever our distinctives are. So any rate, the bottom line is leadership is a process of influence that involves relationships, communication, and vision. And what I'd encourage you to do is think about that. But remember, I said there's no consensus on what is leadership. So I would encourage you to not just sort of blindly accept that, or maybe memorize it and start telling people, hey, this is what it is. I would encourage you to think about it and come up with your own definition. And I would encourage you to sort of give yourself the freedom to maybe, it's not like you will once and for all say what you think it is, and then you're never allowed to change. I mean, if you're a manager, you've got to have some idea. Try to articulate that, maybe write it down, and start to kind of use that as your definition, and see what kind of feedback you get. And at least what happens then you've got a way to think about leadership. So when someone asks you, hey, what's leadership? Your answer ought to just come right out. At any rate, I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich. I'm the engineering leadership guy. I like to talk about leadership and engineering. And if you like this video, you can find more at tomulrichconsulting.com. If you're on YouTube, you can search on Dr. Tom Ulrich. And if you don't mind, maybe you give me a little like, maybe you make a comment, I'll comment back. And if you subscribe, that'd be amazing. YouTube sort of recommends me to more situations, the more likes I get and the more subscriptions, so that's actually very important. At any rate, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.